Tonight's guest is Christopher. Christopher, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming on. We appreciate your time. Christopher, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
My name is Christopher, and I am 53 years old. I live in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Previously from Colorado. Moved down here when I was 15 years old. And so I consider this home.
Wow, you moved from Colorado to Baton Rouge. If that isn't culture shock, I don't know what is.
Huge. It was enormous. Living in Colorado and having the mountains right there and skiing all the time. And then moving down to, a good way to put it was, when I first made a trip down here, I thought we had overshot the United States and landed in Central America because it was so hot. It was just screamingly hot, and it still is. It's just, that's the way it is. But then we've got bayous and a beautiful culture, and it's just a great place to live. I call it home.
You don't just have the heat to deal with, you have the humidity as well. You moved from a fairly cool, dry area to a hot, humid one. That had to be really rough.
What was rough about it was I prefer it the way I am right now, hot and humid, than dry and windy. It was absurdly dry and windy in Denver. When we would get those Chinook winds coming out of the mountains, it would just piss everybody up, make everybody angry. Let's just say that. I prefer living down here and being close to the coast, Florida, Mississippi, and South Louisiana. It's just a great place to live.
Well, it goes without saying, I'm so glad you like it so much down there. That's great. What would you say is the most frightening thing about Dogman, Chris?
For me, the most frightening thing about Dogmen was the fact that I was not sure what I was seeing, and it should not have done what it did as far as standing up. That frightened me. It terrified me for 4 nights that I was stuck out in the swamp, and I sure as heck was not going to tell anybody about it. At the time, I had only been here for 4 years, never heard about it, really. That's what scares me the most, is that it should not exist. Nobody thinks it should exist. No one would believe you if you told them. So there's the fear of ridicule and the fear of the unknown.
Yeah, as the listeners are going to hear, you're doing just fine until the Dogman stood up. I actually have a t-shirt that says that. It's all fun and games until the Dogman stands up. Yeah, that's when things get intense. I'll bet you haven't been that worked up since you found out the Thundercats were loose.
Thundercats go.
That's right. The younger listeners aren't going to know what that's all about, but they're missing out.
They are.
That's right. You had the encounter we're going to talk about 30 years ago. Has all the time that's elapsed made it easier for you to deal with that experience, or is it still as difficult to deal with now as it was back then?
It has made it a little easier because of your show, and I've heard it on other podcasts. I'm not the only one. And at the time, I really thought I was the only one. And it wasn't until the invention of the internet and podcast app or something or another. But when I started listening to those, I was like, okay, I have a name now, Dogman. How stupid. You know, I mean, the Dogman name just does not sound, I mean, it's a perfect name for it because it stands up like a man. But other than that, you really can't put a name to it. If you really sat down and tried to think of the best possible name for that creature, there just isn't one, really.
You're right. But the term Dogman, it gets the point across. It's funny, I've actually been accused of being the one who named them Dogmen. Far from it. Yeah, it wasn't me who named them, but the name does get the point across at least. You just touched on this. Back when you had your encounter, it wasn't nearly as easy to find out information about Dogmen as it is now. How long did you go before you found out what it was that you saw?
All right. So 1989. I'm trying to remember when I really started listening to stuff on the internet. Maybe 2007, 2008, maybe 2009. It maybe 10, 11, 12 years ago. That's about how long. And that's when I started letting my guard down.
Yeah, you went a long time then.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, unfortunately. Locals in Louisiana have warned you about things that creep around the swamps there that they don't like to talk about. Please expand on that for us.
The Cajuns, and when I say Cajuns, there's Cajuns everywhere in South Louisiana, but I'm talking about the people that live down in the Atchafalaya. The specific Cajuns I'm talking about are in the Atchafalaya, which is basically east of Lafayette and to Baton Rouge. And that's the Atchafalaya Basin. And the Atchafalaya Basin spreads out down to Morgan City, Louisiana. And that's right on the Gulf. They will talk about Sasquatch, which is not really a big thing in South Louisiana. That's more of a North Louisiana thing. But they will talk about Dogmen, or Rougarou, as they call it down here, which I didn't know about until much later. There are creatures that they won't even talk about. I think it's bad gree to talk about some of the things that are living down there. And one of the things that sticks out in my mind the most are vampiric type creatures. And I'm not talking Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise looking vampires. I'm talking about hominids that are on two legs, have two arms, two legs. But if you saw one, you'd say that is not a human. That is something else. And they will suck people and animals dry. They just don't like talking about stuff like that, even though they know that they're down there. And they will not go out at night. Typically, if they're doing their alligator and crawfish hunting, that's going to be during the day. They just will not go out there during the night. And they rarely do it by themselves. That's something that, on those shows, they always show them with two people, they're always heavily armed. If I would have known all these things all those years ago, I wouldn't have gone down there.
Can't say I blame you. Can't say I blame you at all. Between one of those vampiric creatures, whatever they are, and Dogmen, if you had to pick one to encounter, which one would you rather run into?
Well, because I had the encounter with the Dogman, I would rather encounter the Dogman because it didn't hurt me in any way. And just the thought of a vampiric type of creature really freaks me out. No, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, from listening to you describe them, they sound awfully creepy.
Yeah, I don't even know if they have green skin, blue skin. I have no idea. I don't know what their features are. All I know is they're hominid and dangerous.
Yeah, sure sounds like it. If you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to talk with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmenencounters.com and submit a report. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on one of my 2 Bigfoot shows, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let me know. All right, Chris, please tell us about your encounter now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay, let's go back to 1989. I was working for an outfitter in Baton Rouge that did a lot of canoe trips out into the Atchafalaya Basin. My boss, in his infinite wisdom, decided that he wanted to get together with a local photographer. He's pretty famous, outdoorsy type photographer, and teach people how to shoot photography in the wild. Well, it's a great idea. And we certainly had the canoes. And so we picked a starting point of Belle River, Louisiana. Now, Belle River is approximately an hour and a half south of Baton Rouge. It's on the intercoastal, what they call the intercoastal highway. It's where big ships can cut across Louisiana to Texas. And if you go south of that, just cross that little channel, you're into the swamps. Back in the day, turn of the last century, not this past century, but early 1900s, late 1800s, they were harvesting cypress trees, which are very high value trees for their furniture quality, and they still are, but they don't really do that anymore. It was, let's see, late spring, and it would have been after daylight savings time. We went down to Belle River on a Monday evening, set up camp at the base, took canoes out the next day, and try to explain a little bit about how the swamps look out there. They have very straight canals, or bayous, as they call them, of course, bayous. Cut channels about 100 feet wide. And if you go on Google Earth and just look up Belle River and just go south, you can zoom in and look exactly what it looks like. Very straight cut channels, occasional wide open spaces. But other than that, it's very straight cut and forward. It's not all windy like you would think of in movies. So we went about 5 miles out and found a shell island. What a shell island is when they were dredging these canals to harvest the trees, they would be picking up huge amounts of oyster shells and, prehistoric. These are fossils. They would just dump them into side channels. Well, we found one that was about 60 feet long, 30 feet wide, set up a base camp, put all the canoes, staked them in. It was very, very nice. It was just perfect. If you can imagine an H of waterways, what I mean by that is hold both of your arms up, and that would be 2 canals, and then one in between. That's where I was, in between these 2 longer canals on the shell island. And so we had it all set up. I had a tent, plenty of firewood. So we go into the evening, or I go into the evening by myself. I was given a 45 in case alligators came up. They're all over the place, but they generally don't bother people. It's dusk. And like I said, it was after daylight savings time. So it may have been 8:30, and the sun was behind the trees, but it was still light out. In that channel that was facing me is where it all began. I saw a dog, what I thought was a dog, going from my left to my right, not 15 feet away from the shore. And it just didn't look right. I immediately thought German Shepherd. It looked like a German Shepherd head. That's all you could really see was the head and the tail. And it did have a tail. The ears didn't look right. That's what really bothered me, was the ears did not look right. They were upright and pointy, just like a German Shepherd, but they were longer, much longer, maybe twice as long as a normal German Shepherd. He went from my left to my right, didn't even glance at me. And I'm like, what in the world is a dog doing way the heck out in the middle of the swamp? And it just didn't make any sense to me. Well, he swam across into the main channel, went across to the edge of the woods. And when you get to the woods, the ground rises dramatically. Depending on what time of the year, it could be anywhere from just dry land to 3 feet of water. But he got there, and this is going to sound weird, but what sounded like he was stepping on twigs or something under the ground or under the water, like snapping, like popping, pop, pop, pop. And he stood up. He actually stood up. And I was like, what in the world am I looking at? He had one, I wouldn't even call it a paw. It looked like a paw where our hand would be before the fingers, but it had very long fingers. And I couldn't see as very well to see if they were anything but fingers, but they were long. And so it was on his right hand, holding onto a cypress tree as he stood up, and he looked over his right shoulder and looked at me. And he looked at me for about 5 seconds, no expression whatsoever, because the only expression I ever know from a dog is when they're holding their tongue out and smile at you, but he wasn't doing that. And then he just looked forward and walked away into the swamp. And there was enough water below his, well, I guess you call it a knee, where I could see that it was the backward bent like a dog would have, but walked just like a person, just walked away. I've heard on other shows, your shows, sometimes these things can be massive. I didn't get that from him. I know how tall it was because I went back the next day and measured it with a paddle. It was rangy. It was not a massively built creature. It was long, lean, but muscular, but not huge. When I went out there the next day and paddled out there, I know that our paddles were 3 feet long, and I stuck it down to the ground, and I knew where its head was from the night before. And I measured it up, and it was just over 7 feet tall. It was either right at 7 feet or maybe a few inches over, but that's how big it was. I'm telling you, Vic, it threw me for a loop. I sat up for the next 4 nights, scared to death that it was going to be out there. I didn't even get my tent. I would catch cat naps sitting by the fire. I always kept a big fire going. And you're right. If it wanted to kill me, it would have killed me. There's no doubt about it. There's no way I would have known it was coming if it wanted to do it. It was that quiet in the water. The only noise it really made was when it was walking away and standing up. When I went into town, there's one thing you got to understand about down there. When they're out and about talking to each other, they're speaking French, or their version of French. They're not speaking English. So if you did ask them a question, of course they talk like that. They would talk to you and say whatever you want to hear. But I did not dare ask what it was that I saw the night before. I was just too scared of them thinking that I was nuts. As I've gone through the years, I'm convinced of one thing. This thing could have gone into any town down there, which there are towns, and they're in the middle of the swamps. They're there. It could be on all fours and have gotten away with not really been noticed, except for somebody saying, "That's a huge freaking dog." And when I heard about the rougarou, and I guess up in Nova Scotia, where the Cajuns are from, they call it the loup-garou. Anything that's been around for a couple hundred years, it's out there. I just didn't know about it at the time. If I had a chance to go back down there, would I? Yeah, I would, because I don't think they really want anything to do with people anyway. Not that they care if they're seen. I don't think they care at all. There's plenty to eat. There's plenty of waterfowl, fish, you name it. They're going to be fine. I just don't know, how have they not been documented after all these years? And basically, Vic, that's my story.
Yeah, that's quite an experience. When you saw that dog man, do you think any of the people you were there with were within shouting distance?
No, absolutely not. They were 5 miles away.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty far.
And that's before they had those walkie-talkies that people use when they're hunting. So there was no cell phones, nothing. I was there, and I was there by myself.
Yeah, you were on your own. You said the dogman swam by about 15 feet from the shoreline of the island you were on, but how close were you to the shoreline?
About 5 feet.
Oh, close.
Yeah, I was close. We were no more than 20 feet away from each other.
Wow, yeah, that's too close for comfort. You told us about the popping sounds you heard as you stood up. After you started to research Dogman, did you find out how common it is for eyewitnesses to report hearing those popping sounds when they stand up?
Not until recently. I really thought he was standing on something and it was popping. But then the more I think about it, it wouldn't have made that sound because it would have been muffled by the water. It would have made a different sound. So it must have been some sort of dysmorphical, if that's even a word, change in his structure to be standing up.
Well, too, you were in shock when all this was going on, so it's expected that you weren't thinking clearly.
True.
Yeah, that's totally expected. Did he seem to be in any discomfort when you started hearing those popping sounds as he stood up?
Not when I was hearing the sounds because it was happening at the time that it was standing up. And all I could think of was, why is it standing up? It wasn't even how. Why? Why is it standing up? I mean, I've seen dogs do that, but only with humans, when they want to come up and see you. No, it was getting up like it was going for a Sunday stroll.
Yeah, think how many times he's done that in the past, so that makes sense. You said he had a rangy build to him, but did his fur make him look unkempt, or was it pretty clean looking?
That's a good question. Well, it had just gotten out of the water. I'm glad you brought that up because I've never really thought about it. It didn't shake off at all. You know how a dog will shake off when it gets out of water? It didn't do that at all. So it was still wet.
If he didn't shake off, how long was his fur?
I'm holding up my fingers here. Maybe 4 inches.
So yeah, that's fairly long. After he stood up onto his back legs, did he look well balanced or did he seem to be kind of shaky?
Perfectly well balanced. Like I said, once you step up off the bayou, it's pretty solid. No, he was perfectly balanced. Just stood up like a normal person. The older I get, when I stand up or sit up, it's like snap, crackle, pop. And that's basically what he did.
Yeah, I can relate. When he stood up, what was he doing with his hands?
Well, the left hand was down by his side. The right hand was up right at his shoulder, off to his right to the cypress tree. And that's all he did. And when he started walking off, he just let it drag down and walked off. That was the thing. He didn't take it off and put it by his side. He let it drag down and then walked off. Like, it was so nonchalant.
That's a sight you're never going to forget.
No,
I'd say not. You told us about sitting up by the fire all night because you felt safer doing that than laying in your tent. Did you warn anyone else in your group about what you saw?
Well, the only other person in my group was at Belle River. So he's 5 miles away. I didn't think that thing would be anywhere near there. So no, I didn't say anything to anybody or anybody that came up with their cameras to shoot wildlife. No, I didn't. It wouldn't have been good for business, and I probably would have got fired.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're probably right. How about after you got back? Did you tell anyone about that experience?
Not a soul. Not a soul. The only person I told was my wife, and she was somewhat skeptical until later years when she would start listening to podcasts when we would be driving, to Dallas or something. And she's like, well, you can't have been the only person to have seen this thing. And they're all telling basically the same story or what it looks like. So maybe there are things like this. And then she started coming around on other things. And this is from a girl that grew up in a haunted house. I mean, geez Louise.
Figures.
I know.
You mentioned how easily you think that Dogman could have gone into any town without raising any eyebrows. How often do you think they do that?
I think it's more common than people think because just the way I saw it when it got up onto the ground on four legs. Before it stood up, I was like, that looks just like a normal dog, but bigger, but not that much bigger. If you see a lot of dogs, when they stand up, they're at least 5, 6 feet tall, like the bigger dogs. So I think this could happen anywhere in any town. They could come in town, dig through whatever trash cans they want, and not raise an eyebrow except for people saying, that's a freaking big dog. That's the only thing I can think of.
You told us he was roughly in the 7-foot or so range when he stood up onto his back legs, but down on all fours, how tall would you say he was?
Well, that was a little more difficult because he still had water up his legs. So 3.5 feet, maybe 3 feet. It was very difficult to tell until he stood up.
No, I understand. Yeah, when you told us about what happened, I figured, okay, yeah, he's still at the water's edge, not totally out of the water, so it's going to be hard to guess how tall he was on all fours. So I get it. Just so we're clear on this, you did say he had digitigrade-style legs. He had hocks and stifled joints instead of ankles and knees, correct?
Correct. I didn't see his ankles, but I did see his knees where they started bending back.
Okay, I see. Had you spent any time in the swamp before you had that experience?
A few times, but not for any period of time. I've been on canoe trips, but mainly around Baton Rouge. But, all around Baton Rouge, especially to the west and south, you got nothing but swamp. So you don't have to go far. They don't have a sightings database that you can look up like the BFRO. So I don't know what has been seen around Baton Rouge. I really wouldn't know if there's anything else around here, but I have been out and I do fish a lot, but I've never seen anything like it again. But that doesn't mean they hadn't seen me.
That's true. You never know. How about after you had that encounter? Have you been back into the swamp since?
Yes, I have been fishing quite a bit, but I don't go that far out. I generally stick to around towns, but you don't have to go far to get good fishing. So no reason to go 5 miles out into the Atchafalaya.
Yeah, I can't say I'll blame you there. And I just took a look on dogmanencounters.com on the encounters page, and I see 2 encounters posted for Louisiana. One's in Jefferson Parish, the other one's in Rapides Parish. Are either one of those in your area?
Jefferson Parish, that's called the parish. That's in New Orleans, in the general New Orleans area. Let's see, Jefferson Parish is, I want to say west of New Orleans, or I'm sorry, east. And Rapides, I'm not exactly sure where Rapides is. I think that's central Louisiana.
Well, given how things are down there with all those swamps that people don't really go into all that often, I'm sure you do have more encounters happening than you can shake a stick at.
Well, you got Mississippi right here, and Alabama, and Florida, and I've heard just as many stories from there as Louisiana.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are plenty of encounters happening in those states and those areas. What's been the most difficult aspect of your experience to get over?
The most difficult aspect has been, I do have dreams about it. And I wouldn't say nightmares. It just seems like I'll see that creature in dreams, in weird places in my dreams. You know how dreams are abstract and they don't really make a whole lot of sense. But I'll be at a party and I'll see it over a fence looking at me. It's always looking at me. It's never that I see it off in the distance. It's always right there. And that has been pretty bothersome for me. Like I said, I don't have nightmares where I wake up sweating and stuff like that. And then the reluctance to say this to anybody. I'm really just coming out, and I'm not old, but I'm getting older, and I just don't care anymore what people think. If they believe me, they believe me. If they don't, they don't. And sometimes it's more often than not, somebody will tell me something strange that happened to them. Not necessarily Dogman, but with a Bigfoot. And it's mainly Bigfoot, especially here or up in North Louisiana. When people go hunting, they'll say, I saw something in my sights that I just can't explain. So I know that there's things out there. I guess you'd say they're the natural order of things. But then again, like I said earlier, science does not want to acknowledge anything they can't document. So that's basically how I feel about that.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons why these guys haven't been documented, but we can make a whole show on that as well.
I would love to hear it.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting one. I'm a little conflicted on this still, Chris. On a scale of 1 to 10, how easy is it for you present day to deal with your encounter? 1 being the most difficult and 10 being the easiest.
Okay. 5 to 6. It doesn't occupy my thoughts at all time. And I live in downtown Baton Rouge, in the city. If you just go across the bridge, which is right here, into West Baton Rouge Parish, you're in swamps. And sometimes I'm afraid to go out fishing too early in the morning, too late at night. I tend to stick to the middle of the day, and at the worst part. It does stick in the back of my mind that I do not want to run into one again, period. I don't care how benevolent or malevolent they are. I don't want to run into one again. But at the same time, I'm not terrified. It's always in the back of my mind. And then I don't want anybody thinking I'm crazy. But like I said, if they think I'm crazy, they think I'm crazy. Whatever.
You're right. If they do, that's a them problem, not a you problem.
It's a them problem. Yeah, exactly.
That's right. That's right. It doesn't sound like dealing with your encounter has been a cakewalk for you, but it did cause some problems still. In your day-to-day life after having that experience, did it cause any major derailments, or were you able to keep things in check to the point that you're still able to function in every capacity required to get the job done and what you needed to do?
All right. Well, for the first 2 years afterwards, I would not go back into the swamp. It took 2 years before I would even go fishing again. And I made something up. I just said, look, I have a medical condition. I cannot be out of sight. I was not going back out on a canoe trip. I just wasn't going to do it. And that was the problem. But other than that, aside from the dreams, no. No, but the first 2 years, no, I was not going back out there. No way.
Yeah, that's pretty much normal for someone who had an experience like the one you had. Did you ever think about consulting professional help?
I did. I didn't want to get labeled with a psychotic disorder. You're going to have somebody, a trained professional psychiatrist or what have you, a psychologist, and say, well, I believe that you believe you saw what you saw. Well, that's no kind of answer that you want to hear, and that just makes you feel crazy.
You're right. Yeah, more times than not, when a person reaches out for help from a quote-unquote professional, that's the response. That's what they get. And also, too, they're several $100s lighter in the pocket for the experience, but yeah, it doesn't do a lot of good. And also, too, like I've said on several occasions before, if you do consult professional help, you are risking being diagnosed as having psychosis.
The only reason I would think that somebody would reach out is if it's having major impact on their lives, where they're having serious panic attacks, stuff like that. Then I can see that.
And if you do reach out in a case like that, you still can't tell the psychologist what it was. So you're stuck that way.
You might be better off saying it's a ghost.
Yeah, that's true. But still, if you do tell them it's a ghost, most of them aren't going to believe in ghosts anyway, so it's going to be right back to the same thing. I know you believe you saw what you're telling me you saw, but you didn't see it.
Well, you would believe a ghost if you lived down here, dude. I'm telling you. I'm pretty sure the entire city of New Orleans is haunted in some way. My brother lived uptown on Carrollton, and my other brother and his wife went down to stay with him, or not stay with him, but stay at his house when he was out of town. They were flying out in the morning to go somewhere. And I remember Brad saying, don't turn on the stereo because it's blown a fuse. I've unplugged it. I don't want anything else happening, so just leave it alone. My sister-in-law was sitting right next to the speaker, and through the speaker it said, "Get out." And boom, they were out the door and were in a hotel room.
Oh, no.
And then it burnt down the next day.
Wow. Well, that ghost was helpful then.
Yeah, well, it was, but she said it sounded so malevolent, so mean. But no, I guess it did save their butts.
Yeah, sounds like it. Unless it's what burned down the hotel.
I know. It didn't follow him, though.
Does make you wonder, though. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, Chris, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, I'm not sorry that I had the encounter that I had. It opened my eyes to a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have opened my eyes to as I got older. I wouldn't even say paranormal, just the normal things that people don't normally think is normal. I think it's expanded my horizons, but on the other hand, I wouldn't want to see it again. So if that makes any sense, that's what I had to say.
Just so I'm clear on this, you said you wouldn't want to see it again, but if you had your druthers, do you wish you never had that experience, or in some way do you feel kind of blessed?
I feel blessed. I know it sounds contradictory, but I wouldn't wish it to happen again, but I wouldn't want it to not have happened. I know that makes no sense whatsoever. It's weird. It really did open my horizons. Let's just say that.
No, I think I understand what you're saying. A lot of people, they walk around and they carry their encounters like a badge of honor, and I understand it. They wouldn't want to go through it again, but they do feel kind of lucky to have had that experience, so that does make sense.
Correct.
But having said that, I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing that experience with us, Chris. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure, Vic. Thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks again so much. Have a great night.